is telling us all that the water inside the cell, the water in biology, was not like water in a glass. Water in a glass, liquid water, the molecules are bouncing around at a furious rate, randomly oriented. But he said, no, the evidence is that's not true inside the cell. The water molecules are lined up like soldiers at attention. And this was so vastly different from the prevailing view, which is that water in biology is just like water in a glass. If this guy is correct, all of biology in the textbooks is wrong.
Gerald Pollack is an internationally recognized scientist and author, most well known for his revolutionary studies in the world of water. In this conversation, Gerald shares his journey of discovering that the water within the cells of the human body is structured differently and distinctly than water outside the body, leading to the concept of easy water, also known as structured or fourth phase water. We discuss the implications of this discovery, which could create a new paradigm of health centered around the idea that water is the basis of what creates energy for healthy functioning.
And so this is kind of astonishing because what's going on is you're starting with neutral water, and somehow the neutral water is broken up into a negative component and a positive component. That's a battery. So we found that water can actually be a battery to supply energy. And later we found that that energy is used in the body. So it's not a trivial kind of finding that water can contain energy. And of course, if there's energy in the water, that energy is certainly used, because nature doesn't create energy and then throws it away. Nature uses the energy.
If we're actually getting our energy from easy water within our body, it may explain many phenomena that defy the traditional ideas around where humans get energy from.
She said 200 or 300,000 people around the world who get by without eating. So it raises the question, if we need food to give us energy, those people should be dead, but they're thriving, and some of them feel really healthy on no food. And so, we have to ask the question, well, where do they get their energy?
Gerald shares how this discovery may change everything and 6 practical ways you can shift your life to make sure your body has enough easy water to function at optimal levels.
So it's a very simple paradigm. Make sure your cell is filled with easy water, otherwise it won't function. That leads very directly to, you might say, a new paradigm for health, which is not really so new because some of the principles actually underlying this have actually been known for a long time.
Before we get into this conversation, I want to ask you to join this amazing community of consciousness explorers. This whole idea of pursuing expanded consciousness and the boundaries of human potential while living a modern life is relatively new, which is why we interview revered masters, teachers, experts, and practitioners to help you on your own journey. To stay up to date on the latest conversations, simply click subscribe below and you'll be notified each time a new episode comes out. I am so grateful for all of your support and comments. I love reading them. Now let's dive into this conversation. Hey, Gerald, how are you?
I'm doing great, and really eager to discuss with you all the exciting stuff that we've been doing. Absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah, I think water is pretty foundational to the human existence. So it's about time we do a little bit of a deep dive on it and some of the more revolutionary ideas that are coming out of the field and of your research. And so maybe to really kind of kick this off, when was the moment that you realized that perhaps there's something much bigger going on with water than the conventional paradigm that we've been told?
That's easy. It was at a conference more than 20 years ago in Hungary. It was a conference to commemorate the life and work of a biophysicist named Ernst. And he was a distinguished biophysicist, and he had 2 areas of interest. And one of them was muscle contraction, which I had been studying for 20 or 30 years, the molecular mechanism. And the other was water. So I was invited to represent the muscle faction, to go there and say a few words about how muscles contract. And I knew that my ideas were not so different from this guy Ernst's ideas, which were which contradicted the prevailing point of view. So I felt at home there. I did my thing, and I think it went well. But there I was astonished. I was astonished to meet this guy Gilbert Ling. And he changed my life. Gilbert Ling was one of four scientists, one of the first four scientists after World War II to come from China to study in the U.S. And of the four, three won Nobel Prizes. Gilbert did not win a Nobel Prize, but his work was surely deserving of such, at least one Nobel Prize, maybe more. Anyway, I heard him speak, and he was telling us all that the water inside the cell, the water in biology, was not like water in a glass. Water in a glass, liquid water, the molecules are bouncing around at a furious rate, randomly oriented. But he said, no, the evidence is that's not true inside the cell. The water molecules are lined up like soldiers at attention. And this was so vastly different from the prevailing view, which is that water in biology is just like water in a glass. And all it does is dissolve the more important molecules of life. And Gilbert said, no way, not true. And he had lots of evidence. And after that, other people, perhaps a dozen other people, presented their evidence to support Gilbert Ling's point of view. I was blown away. And I know that I'm easily blown away. So I decided to check myself out. I went home and I gave one of his 3 or 4 books, I forget at the time, to some of my students who I thought, might be conversant with the material. And they all came back to me with similar responses. If this guy is correct, all of biology in the textbooks is wrong, first of all. And it looks like he's correct because there's a lot of evidence to support his point of view. So I felt justified, and I was scratching my head and figuring out, okay, what are we going to do? This seemed so important, I couldn't ignore it. I had been studying, as I said, contraction of muscle at the molecular level, and I thought we had made substantial gains, although people in the field were hardly receptive to our points of view. But I couldn't resist studying water because water was at the, as you said earlier, at the basis for everything. It's all over. Water is life. And so I figured, what am I going to do? We had money to study muscles. We had no money to study water. Although the main component of muscles is water. But even so, if you actually look at some of the mechanisms that have been devised or put forth to describe how muscles contract, water is missing. It's as though the proteins in muscle act in a vacuum. And if they're surrounded by water, it's different from being surrounded by nothing. And well, at any rate, first thing I did was to write a book. It was called Cells, Gels, and the Engines of Life. So what was the purpose of the book? The first half of the book was designed to reveal in a way that is understandable, perhaps to the layman or the advanced layman, what Gilbert Ling was talking about. Gilbert, as brilliant as he was, his capacity for communicating was limited, I would say. And I think what he would do, he never told me this, but I think he'd sit down at the typewriter or the word processor, bat out something, send it off to the publisher, and it gets published. The word editing, I think maybe the word doesn't exist in the Chinese language. I'm not sure. But at any rate, understanding what his wisdom was a real challenge. So I attempted to do that in the book, and then the second half of the book goes on to say, well, if Gilbert Ling is right, how really do cells work? And I found a half dozen or examples of a half dozen fundamental mechanisms where the so-called structured water that Gilbert was talking about, where it transitions when let's say take a muscle, for example, a muscle cell. The muscle cell could be in the relaxed state, could be in the contracting state. And when it goes from the relaxed state, where the water is, like Gilbert Ling was talking about, structured water, can't do very much. Structured water, everything is organized just like ice, and not much happens in ice. So it needs to undergo some kind of transition. And we found clear evidence in the second half of the book that it was a phase transition. That is, what happens is the water undergoes a transition from the ordered water to ordinary liquid water. And then when the contraction ends and the cell needs to go back to the relaxed state, the water returns from ordinary liquid water back to the structured state. So it's a phase transition, well known in physics and chemistry, but not so much in biology. So the book came out, and it came out with mixed reviews, and some of the reviews suggested, well, this is more of Gilbert Ling, and since everybody knows that Gilbert Ling is a crackpot, pay no attention to this book. and there were a few reviews like that. And then there were other reviews on the flip side. There was one guy from Harvard, and of course, he's from Harvard, we have to pay attention to it. Anyway, a famous cell biologist, and he said, this is a 304-page preface to the future of cell biology. And I like that one better. So at any rate, that was how I got into this. And of course, we wanted to study this water, but maybe I should wait for your next
question. Can I
question.
ask, the question that I have is, so you talked about how this kind of went against everything that you've been told about how things work in the cellular level. Like, what were the implications of this finding that you went on to uncover about how the human body works and frankly, how it impacts just our health and well-being?
Okay, so to tell you that, I have to tell you about the results of the experiments that we did, because
let's hear it.
They make all the difference. We started with the idea that, okay, Gilbert Ling is probably right, and we found that in many ways he was right. The water in the cell it differs from ordinary liquid water for sure, but what we found makes all the difference. So let me explain to you. Gilbert Ling was talking about order, about the water's ordered, and when things are ordered, it's like a crystal. And when crystals form, if they're really pure, if you start with some liquid, which then condenses into a crystal, if the liquid is not pure, if it has contaminants, then the contaminants need to be pushed out in order to form a pure crystal, right? Because pure means it has no contaminants. And so that's what we were looking for. We had the idea that there is this region of water that is structured, and so we set up a preparation to see if we can find a region where particles or molecules are excluded. So we started with a container of water with little particles. There are little spheres called microspheres, a suspension of those, and into that we plunked a gel, and we looked at what happened next to the surface of the gel, surfaces of the little piece of gel. Not so different from Jell-O, but we used different gels. The first was a polyvinyl alcohol, but it doesn't matter. And what we found astonished us. We were successful. Early on, we found that next to each and every surface of the gel, those little particles, the microspheres, were pushed out and leaving us a region right around the gel, a kind of peripheral region, a large region around the gel that was devoid of particles. And it remained that way pretty much indefinitely. And so we thought possibly this region is the region that Gilbert Ling was talking about. Because it excluded, we call it exclusion zone, or EZ for short. Works in the US because easy to remember, but not in Europe because it's EZ. And so it doesn't quite work as well. Later, we began calling it fourth phase water because everything we've measured of that phase differed remarkably from ordinary liquid water. So we thought at first, oh yeah, we confirmed Gilbert Ling, but then there was more. We had some experience with poking electrodes into cells many years ago. And by the way, the electrodes that can successfully do that were invented by the same Gilbert Ling. And people used them, went on to win Nobel Prizes based on what they could find with those electrodes. So we had a little experience and we decided to stick an electrode into this fourth phase or exclusion zone. We expected to find neutrality because we start with neutral water. And, why would we expect anything but neutrality? We found negative charge, which we didn't expect. So, scratching one's head, how is it possible that you start with neutral water and you wound up with a large region that's negatively charged? It kind of doesn't make sense. There must be a positively charged region somewhere else because, you started with neutrality, and so you have to wind up with neutrality. You can't create charge from nothing. And we found it. So we start with the gel, and next to the gel is this EZ region or fourth phase region with negative charge. And we found that beyond that region is the positive charge. And so this is kind of astonishing because what's going on is you're starting with neutral water, and somehow the neutral water is broken up into a negative component and a positive component. That's a battery. Now, so we found that water can actually be a battery to supply energy. And later we found that that energy is used in the body. So it's not a trivial kind of finding that water can contain energy. And of course, if there's energy in the water, that energy is certainly used because nature doesn't create energy and then throws it away. Nature uses the energy. So this is the one or the first kind of interesting, or I would say astonishing, to us findings that water is like a battery. It can and does deliver energy. And so the next question, and that's I'll end this segment of the discussion with that because I know you have a lot of questions. The question is, you can't create energy from nothing. You can only take one kind of energy and have it transition into another kind of energy. You can't energy. One law of physics, a simple law that I believe is true, that you can't create or destroy energy. You can only convert it into another kind of energy. So the question is, if this water somehow gets converted into like a battery, where's the energy coming from to do that? And I must admit, we couldn't figure out the answer. And the answer came actually from a student, an undergraduate student working in the lab. And he was working with one of these chambers that I described to you earlier in our discussion. And either he was curious or he was bored. I'm not sure which one. And he noticed sitting right next to him was one of these gooseneck lamps. So he took the lamp and he shined it on the chamber. And he noticed that the region that was illuminated with light, the exclusion zone, grew enormously. Um, and he called me in, and of course I was astonished because I thought, oh, he got the answer that we were looking for. It's light. Light is responsible. Optical energy is responsible for building the exclusion zone. We then undertook serious experiments to see which of the many wavelengths contained in that light were responsible for this. Well, it turned out we studied a full range from ultraviolet at the short wavelength through the invisible spectrum at the mid wavelengths, and at the long wavelengths to infrared. UV, ultraviolet had no effect. Visible light, practically none. A little bit, but not much. Infrared, the longest wavelengths, a massive effect. We could take a very small amount of light from an LED, shine it down the chamber, and we could get the exclusion zone to grow by 10 times, for example. So really powerful, minute amounts of infrared energy. The question, of course, that people will ask, well, infrared energy, we don't have a toaster sitting next to the exclusion zone. Well, what do you mean by infrared energy? Well, infrared energy does indeed come from the toaster. You can see the glowing coils giving off heat, and we have a tendency to say, well, that's infrared energy. However, infrared energy is all over. If I were to turn off all lights at nighttime, dark outside, and I couldn't see anything in my room, or the same thing for you. You couldn't see anything. Your cell phone camera could record nothing. If you took an infrared camera, that is like a regular camera, but the sensor is sensitive to infrared wavelengths. Even in the dark, you get a beautiful image of everything behind me. You can see this poster that's sitting behind me, the molding on the wall, the chair, my glasses, what have you. And that's why infrared is everywhere. And that's why the military, at nighttime, they use infrared cameras or infrared optics to look to see where are the enemy tanks, et cetera, because everything is giving off infrared. And because everything is giving off infrared, of course, the sun being the most powerful, everything is giving off infrared. That means that the energy that's needed for creating this easy water is always there. If you give more of it, you get bigger easy. But under ambient conditions, you have plenty of it. And so it means if the conditions are right, and the conditions being that you need like a gel surface or any hydrophilic, almost any hydrophilic, that is water-loving surface. And that's a surface where, you drop water and the water spreads out. That's hydrophilic. Hydrophobic is like Teflon, where the water beads up. That doesn't work. But the hydrophilic surfaces work. If you have that situation of some surface and water next to it, some of that water will inevitably convert to easy water or to battery. So I think I should stop there because that's been a segment, and I think
definitely some striking findings that I want to ground into practicality. And so I think if I were to sum this up, you guys discovered that water is in fact an energy source powered by light.
Yes.
And that, our bodies are however much, call it a high percentage of water. And I think the traditional narrative is that, we get our energy from food. And this actually kind of paints perhaps a different narrative of, we actually are getting a lot of energy from the water in our bodies, which is impacted by light. Yep. And so how can we conceptualize this idea of water into creating good health, and what actually deters our health when it comes to the state of the water in our bodies? I hope you're enjoying this conversation so far. If you like what you hear, let me know by clicking like, subscribing to the channel, and responding with a comment around something that you found interesting in the conversation so far. In addition to these videos, I do a lot of writing on the exploration of consciousness and my own personal revelations in my newsletter called Consciousness: The Doorway to Human Evolution. To receive these updates and more, all you need to do is simply head to the link in the description below and you'll be added to the community of 20,000 plus consciousness explorers receiving weekly ideas and inspiration in their inbox. I look forward to hearing from you there. Now let's get back to the show.
Great question. And this is really a central point that you bring up. And glad you're drinking water. Unfortunately,
I'm wondering how do I get this structured, but maybe we'll get into that after we answer this one.
Yes, we will. So, in order to answer your question, we revert back to something we discussed earlier that we found in this Cells and Gels book, that in order to function, the cell undergoes a phase transition. It goes from easy water or structured water or fourth phase water to ordinary liquid water and then back again. That's the cycle through which it goes. But in order to do that, your cell needs to have an ample complement of easy water in it. And most of the water inside your cell, and a good, healthy cell, is indeed easy water. That the idea of structured water was found by Gilbert Ling and by other people and by us. That's the kind of water that's in the cell. And that's why the cell is negatively charged. All cells have negative electrical potential. And the negativity of that potential comes from the easy water, which is typically negatively charged. Now, I need to mention that is not the standard view. The standard textbook view is that the reason that the cell has negative charge is that the membrane contains pumps and channels, kind of gadgetry, through which more negative ions are pumped into the cell than positive ions, or fewer negative ions are pumped out of the cell through special channels, leaving the cell negatively charged. I've argued and written about this in several different venues. I think it's dead wrong, completely wrong, for simple reasons that I could discuss, but I think I'd rather focus on other things. A simpler explanation for why the cell is negatively charged is that the cell is full of easy water, which is typically negatively charged. And now, in order to go through this phase transition, you got to have a good complement of easy, negatively charged easy water inside the cell, or structured water inside the cell. And most cells and healthy people are indeed filled with easy water. But if your cell is, if your cell is less filled with easy water because of one of a number of issues or problems, then that transition becomes difficult or impossible. And so the cell is not functioning. It's either dysfunctional or it's pathological. Simple logic says if your cell is dysfunctional because it doesn't have enough easy water, what you need to do to restore function properly is to build easy water. So it's a very simple paradigm. Make sure your cell is filled with easy water. Otherwise, it won't function. That leads very directly to, you might say, a new paradigm for health, which is not really so new because some of the principles actually underlying this have actually been known for a long time. So what are these expedients that you can use? Well, there are 6 of them that I would like to mention, and that can build easy water to your cells, and some of them we do all the time without even thinking about it. The first one is what you were doing a moment ago, drinking a glass of water. So some of that water that you drink gets peed out, and another fraction of that water gets transitioned into EZ water, because you've got a lot of infrared energy, both inside the body from metabolic heat, and also coming from outside, as I mentioned earlier. So you've got the energy, you've got the surfaces, the hydrophilic surfaces, like practically all the molecules inside the cell are of that ilk. And so some of the water you drink gets transitioned into easy water, and you become healthier. And we're told that we have to be sure that we're not dehydrated, but there's a lot to that that our results have brought to light. What that's doing, it's not just a vague idea of rehydrating yourself. It's a more specific idea of rehydrating the cell by building easy water. So you play 2 matches of tennis, you're dead to the world, you sit down, and you drink 1 liter of water, 2 liters of water, and you've got new energy again. The water actually creates energy. So that's the first one. The second
Can I just
one,
pause on that? It's really interesting for me because I've always just conceptualized it's like, yeah, drink water. It's good for you. It flushes your system, but it's never been in the category of energy source. It's never been in the category of fuel. I think that's just been a huge disconnect for the narrative, frankly, of the role of water.
I think it's critically important. And, if we're right, I think we're right, but one never knows, because it's been said that even, I can almost quote, even the most beautiful of theories can be destroyed by one ugly fact. So, but I think we have so much evidence now that's pointing in that direction, which suggests that we might actually be right in what we're thinking. So yeah. Sorry, you were about to say something.
No, it also makes me think of all those people that just survive on water fasts.
Well, that's a really brilliant point.
That seems quite related to what you're pointing to.
It's absolutely related. I found out in speaking to an Australian woman, Jasmuthine, I forget her last name, who is sort of the coordinator of all the people who don't eat. And she tells me there are, I think she said 200 or 300,000 people around the world who get by without eating. So, raises the question, if we need food to give us energy, those people should be dead. But they're thriving, and some of them feel actually really healthy, surviving or thriving on no food. And so, we have to ask the question, well, where do they get their energy? Because you need energy to walk, from your seat to the kitchen, and back, if you like, or to the toilet, if that appeals to you, and if you're not eating, you should be getting no energy, but apparently you're getting energy. And so, it's not complicated to think that, well, just like plants get their energy from light, we can also get our energy from light. So it's not so radical to have such a thought. The idea being that we do some of the same things that plants do. And when you'd think that Mother Nature was successful in creating green plants. She had this energy all worked out. She got bored. She decided, well, I think I'll create animals. So she created us. And then there was the issue of food or of energy. So we can forage, look around for some plants or whatever, get them, eat them. Or we could employ the same mechanism. Mother Nature could have retained the same mechanism that was so successful in green plants, as a backup for us, or as a complementary measure, or even more. So I guess I'm going to go out on a limb. We already have evidence, and I could talk about that. We get to it, that this energy is actually used in our system. Actually, the clear evidence we have is in the cardiovascular system. It's actually used, but we don't know how much of the energy that we get comes from the food or through ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which I'll get to in a moment if we have a chance, and how much is this kind of electrical energy that I'm talking about. The electrical energy could be 2%, 5%, could be 100%, and we simply don't know because we need more experiments to figure that out. And the reason I'm suggesting this is that the idea that all of our energy comes from chemistry, from chemical energy, it's an old idea, starting in 1941 by a guy named Lippincott. And everybody was really excited because finally this eminent scientist figured out where our energy comes from, and the food eventually goes through a complicated process, and the coin of the realm then is a molecule called adenosine triphosphate, which has 3 phosphate molecules, and one of those phosphate molecules is said to have a high energy, and that's what delivers the energy to the body. Well, a year or two after, a group, equally prominent group, and I've been searching for the paper ever since Gilbert Ling died, and it was in his website. I'm having trouble finding it, but I remember distinctly reading it. This group saying, well, Lippincott and people, unfortunately, they made a simple arithmetic error. There's no such thing as a high energy phosphate. 10 years after that, another group of people whom I know, Morales and Podolsky, studied in great detail. And they also found that the molecule adenosine triphosphate has absolutely no phosphate group that has any high energy. All the phosphates are just like every other phosphate. And then a couple of other studies beyond that. Almost nobody knows of these studies. Everybody accepts the idea that ATP is what supplies the energy through food. If these people are correct, that's wrong. And I'm not sure if it's wrong or if it's right, but if it's wrong, then you need something else. And we've offered the something else. So electrical energy coming from water, splitting of water, could represent a small fraction of the energy that we require, or it could represent a large fraction, or at the extreme, all of our energy could come from that. We don't know. The experiments really need to be done.
Well, what's interesting that I guess provides some supporting evidence, just an anecdote to what you're talking about, is that I have come across people that have gone without food for hundreds of days at a time. And what was the main practice that they employed? It was looking at the sun in the early morning and evening, looking directly at the sun when it was not harmful to their eyes. And it seems that you have discovered that light and sunlight is an incredibly powerful source that can kind of power this innate battery system that we have inside of our bodies that we've been largely unaware of.
Absolutely. Yeah. Good observation. It's really true. The reality may be so different from what we think. The fundamental research is absolutely critical.
What's funny to me is I have so many friends who are talking about our toxic food system here in the United States, which is an unfortunate thing with just the pesticides and the seed oils and lots of things. And maybe the answer is we actually don't need as much food as we think, not, start growing your own food. Maybe it's something else. It actually has really profound implications.
Well, it absolutely does. Not more to say about that except the water. The water is really, really critical because you need, as I started to discuss, you really need a full complement of easy water inside your cells to make your cells function properly. So that the drinking water was the first, and I was going to mention several
Yeah,
others.
let's hear the other ones, and I'd be particularly interested in things that perhaps people aren't doing, right? So like I think a lot of people know like, okay, I drink water, that's good, but like what are the things that, you know, the basics and maybe the things that are less common that people can consider for increasing their easy water supply?
Okay, well that fits with the second. The second one is juicing. Not everybody knows what I'm talking about, but juicing means it's a term that's used for going into your backyard, picking some leaves of freshly grown plants, crushing them to squeeze out the water, and drinking that water. Sometimes amended with something to confer a better taste, um, and um, and that procedure has been touted by multiple health practitioners as being the easiest thing you can do to ensure good health. So, what are you actually doing? Well, when you're squeezing the water out of those plants, you're squeezing the water from inside the plant cells, and inside the freshly grown plant cells is abundant, easy water, just like our cells. So you're drinking easy water, and that's probably the easiest way to build easy water in your body. Just drink it. So that's number two, and perhaps that's a little bit less common than the usual. Okay, what's next? Well, sunshine. You mentioned it, and people don't take seriously what the benefit of sunshine. Some do, but not many. So what does sunshine do? Well, in Seattle, where I live, in the wintertime, there's not much sunshine. The skies are perpetually gray, and occasionally the sun will peep through, and you can see people's faces. Their mouths transition from looking sad, morose, to feeling happy when the sun comes out. The interpretation is usually given to that phenomenon as, it's a psychological effect, and indeed it may be. However, could be another effect because, we're born to feel good. When we were kids, mostly we felt good, and it's only as we transition into adults that we begin to feel depressed and unhappy and whatever. And the sun comes out, you feel happy. But I think the possibility is that the sunshine, half of the sun's energy is infrared energy. And the idea is sun comes out, it passes through your skull. And we know it passes through your skull because there are imaging methods that depend on passing through your skull in order to image your brain. The source out here, infrared, goes in, comes back out, and you get an image. So the sun's rays hit our brain. And what do? Well, the same thing I'm talking about. They build easy water. So our brain cells transition from kind of tired, whatever, depressed. The sun comes out, builds easy water in those brain cells, and we feel good. So that's another possible explanation. And this sun.
Do you think the vitamin D thing is really an easy water thing?
We haven't studied that, so I'm afraid I can't say. I have no comment.
Okay.
I wouldn't be surprised.
It's interesting though because it's cited as such a huge like indicator or biomarker related to not being in ideal health, and the solution is often go get sunlight, and perhaps there's more going on there than we know.
I think there's more going on than you know. And a way of amplifying that, some people know about, other people don't know about, is the fourth item, that is the sauna, or as the Finns say, sauna. So you know the deal. You take off your clothing, maybe take a shower ahead of time, walk in, sweat, and you feel the heat. The common feature of the sauna is heat, whether it's moist heat or dry heat, it's heat. And heat is associated with infrared energy. So what you're doing by walking into the sauna is exposing yourself to infrared energy. Your body absorbs it. And you can imagine that the cells that are somehow deficient in easy water, as they're exposed to that infrared, they build easy water. And when you come out, you feel more awake, more tired, more relieved of pains that you had, etc. And that's why in Finland and Russia, places north especially, the sauna is a regular feature, or sauna, a regular feature of life. And I can tell you my own experience. I remember once going to a conference, giving a talk in Finland, quite north in Finland, where the sun never set in the summertime. And after the session was over, the scientific session, everybody was invited to a party. And I went to the party and enjoyed everything, the entertainment and the dinner. And I was so jet lagged that all I wanted to do is get in the bus and get driven back to the hotel so I could go to sleep. And so about 10 p.m., the master of ceremonies, or whatever equivalent was, stood up at the microphone. I was sure he's going to say, okay, let's all go now, return to the bus and go back to your hotel so you can sleep. He said, okay, it's time for the sauna. So I can't tell you how disappointed I was, but I went, and after 30 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, I felt like I had 8 hours sleep. It was like morning. I couldn't believe the transition. It was like day to night, or night to day. So that's the fourth one. Any source of infrared energy like the sauna is going to be good for you. And so that's, you might say, now, the fourth expedient that
just a quick question there. There are infrared saunas, and then there's just kind of your normal sauna without the infrared light. It sounds like because heat is a generator of infrared light, that either would work sufficiently.
I think so. I'm no expert. I can't tell you which one, is more effective. But yes, a lot of people are using infrared light as their sauna. Okay, so the next one, which also maybe less not quite so obvious, is there have been various herbs and such that have been used for thousands of years. The Ayurveda culture used some of these herbs starting 5,000-10,000 years ago. And apparently they work because people who lived 5,000 or 10,000 years ago, they also were interested in good health. It's not something new. And there were various expedients that were used. And we've largely forgotten many of them, but there's a kind of a slight resurgence of interest. And we were curious about that. Like, for example, take turmeric. Turmeric now is widely advertised, good for your health, but nobody knows exactly why. At least there's been some reawakening to the fact that, this is good stuff for you. So it appears that turmeric can deal with pretty much whatever ails you. And that's peculiar because according to standard interpretations, what you'd think is, well, there must be a turmeric receptor in practically every organ of our body, because turmeric does have a positive effect on practically every organ. So that's one interpretation, that we've got these receptors in every cell or every tissue of our body. Another interpretation is that turmeric has an impact on some substance that then exists in every organ of our body, and that would be water. So we asked the question, what does turmeric do? If we add a little turmeric to our preparation of that I discussed with you, of where we can see the buildup of easy water, does turmeric have an effect? Does it expand or build easy water? We found it does, and it was not just turmeric, but in our published papers, we found it was not just turmeric, but basil, so-called holy basil, also does that, and ghee, clarified butter, was the champion. It could build exclusion zones up to 1 millimeter in size, and 1 millimeter by molecular standards is practically infinite. So it really works to build it, and we started several other of these agents, and they all built easy water. So we drew a conclusion that, in order to gain health, you need easy water, filling your cell, and these agents help to fill your cell with easy water, and that's the reason that they're so effective in building easy water. When we did the experiments, we did a control. We looked at something that's poisonous, so we looked at glyphosate, which kills weeds, and hopefully doesn't kill us, but there's a lot of controversy about that issue. And we found that at every concentration, all it did was reduce the size of easy water, and that was a good control for us. So we appreciated that. So that's the number 5 expedient. Take these agents on a continuing and regular basis to preserve your health. And then the 6th one, which also may not be so obvious, it is to some, but not to others, is grounding yourself electrically, or so-called earthing yourself. In Europe, it's called earthing. Here, it's grounding. The two are the same. So what does that mean? Well, generally, we walk around with leather shoes, and leather is an insulator, so we're isolated from the earth. If you take off the shoes and, for example, walk on wet grass, or walk on the shoreline, this wet sand near the ocean, we generally feel good when we do that. And the question is, well, what's going on? And you could have knocked me over with a toothpick, I think, some years ago, in hearing what I heard, which I think holds the answer to that. And I heard it from a Russian guy who had been working in my lab. He had a lot of ideas, and after a while, sometimes I was too busy to listen to all of his ideas. But the day he was leaving my lab and returning to Russia, he starts talking to me about the Earth's electric field. And I said, I had been an electrical engineering student. I never heard of an electric field. So I said to Andre, I said, that you're talking about magnetic field, right? He said, no, I'm talking about electric field. I said, what are you talking about? I studied electrical engineering, and nobody ever told me that there's an electric field on the Earth, that the Earth is negatively charged, and the ionosphere up there is positively charged. It's like a capacitor, and you've got an electric field running between these two, the Earth being negatively charged. I had trouble sleeping that night because I couldn't believe that he's telling me this. And, as a former electrical engineering student, I should have known it. But no professor ever indicated to me anything but that, if you take the plug with the third prong, you stick the third prong in, and that's connected to an infinite source of neutrality. Neutral. The Earth is neutral. And he was telling me the Earth is negative. So I next day, another student comes in with the Feynman lectures. Richard Feynman, the great Nobel laureate from the second half, the Einstein of the second half of the last century, so-called. And his lectures are legendary. And volume 2 of his book of lectures, volume 2, chapter 9, is an entire chapter filled with evidence that the Earth is negatively charged. Um, so that's what Andre was telling me. I didn't believe it, but hearing it from Feynman and seeing a chapter's worth of evidence, you begin to think it's correct. Well, okay, so that's history. Now, what happens if you connect yourself to this negatively charged Earth electrically? Connect yourself electrically. And many people have been doing this for quite a few years, and there's probably an equal number of theories as to why it works or how it works. And I have my own, very simple. When you connect yourself to negative charge, the negative charge pours into any region of your body that doesn't have enough negative charge or enough easy water, and creates easy water. We have laboratory evidence. If you put negative charge into ordinary liquid water, that water converts into easy water. Published evidence. So the bottom line, I'm sorry it takes so long to discuss it. The bottom line is if you connect yourself electrically to the Earth by any of a number of expedients, mud baths, swimming in the salt water, you're actually connecting yourself to that negative charge, which seeps into your body, builds easy water, and you feel better. So those are, there are more expedients. Those kind of a half dozen common or not so common, as you wish, expedients that people can use to maintain their health, and many of them do.
Those are all good ones. I love that, and it's really cool to hear some new thinking on the potential mechanism of what's going on there, right? Because I think with a lot of this stuff, we know it works and it seems to help, but we don't know why. And the more we can understand why, I think the more that these concepts can become mainstream and we can be a healthier society.
The how and the why are the questions to ask, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. And I know recently you've come out with some research as to how this body of work relates to cancer.
Yes,
and I would love to hear about that.
Yeah, well, it's not complicated. I presented my simple idea to a naturopath friend of mine who's into the field of cancer, and he says, "You can't be right because cancer is so complicated." We think it's complicated because there's been intensive study for more than 50 years. President Nixon declared war on cancer, and now there's another national program, and it's been studied for so long with only very limited progress. Cancer is practically as serious, and some people argue more serious a problem than it's been. And the possibility is that it's really not complicated. The possibility is that we're looking in the wrong direction. And so if you look in the wrong direction, if you lose your keys and look where the street light can illuminate the area, but the keys are not there, you'll never find the keys. So it's a kind of similar analogy. It's possible we've been, or scientists have been studying cancer, medical scientists, almost entirely in the context or the framework of genetics. But suppose the answer lies somewhere else. We may miss it completely if we don't look into it. So that's what I've done, and I published the paper just a month ago, and it's already attracted amazing interest. In fact, it's going to be in a film that's being made right now. So let me explain to you. It all started 50 years ago when a guy named Clarence Cohn was interested in cancer and interested in cells that just keep dividing, and he was interested in what is it about the cell that makes it divide, and he found that it was the electrical potential of the cell. So he found that if the electrical potential was small, in other words, -10, -15, it's always minus, but 10 or 15 millivolts, as compared to normal cells of 60, 70, 80, 90 millivolts, the cell would divide. If it's held or at that potential, electrical potential for some time, the cell would keep dividing. It didn't matter if it's a cancer cell or a non-cancer cell. And so that I found very interesting. And I looked further to find out whether other people had found something similar. This is 50 years ago. And I found a review article that looked at this very question and looked at many different cell types, perhaps 3 or 4 dozen. In every single case, cells that divide, whether they're cancer cells, which divide as part of the cancer, or embryonic cells, for example, cells that ordinarily divide for a living, they always had low electrical potential, -10, -20, or something like that. And cells that practically never divided always had large electrical potential, -90, -100. So it's a general phenomenon, without exception. And I'm thinking, cancer cells, the hallmark of cancer cells is that they keep dividing and they have low electrical potential. Well, what does that mean? Well, what it means in terms of the framework that we've been talking about, it hasn't got much easy water. It's pathological because it hasn't. And the measure of that pathology is that the electrical potential, the negative electrical potential, is small. Because easy water is what builds it up. But if you don't have much easy water, you have a small negative electrical potential. You see, and so that's the crux of the matter. And so for cancer cells, which if you look in the electron microscope, you see that they're pretty much devoid of structure, and it's a structure of the solids inside the cell that serve to nucleate the growth of easy water, but you don't have much solids, and they're kind of not, the ones that are there are not normal looking. You can't build much easy water, so the electrical potential is small, and that's the trigger for a division. So at the end of the article, I conclude that this is a potential mechanism, a simple mechanism, I think, to look into, and if it's valid, then the expedients that can be used are very clear. The half dozen that I was describing a moment ago to build easy water is exactly what you need to help reverse the cancer issue. And many of them are already used right now, but people don't relate their use to easy water. The clinicians find, well, it's effective. One clinician came to me and said, young women come to me, they have cancer somewhere on their face and don't want surgery because of the disfigurement. And so I take my infrared lamp, I shine it on their face, and they get cured. And
wow.
He had at the time no thinking about easy water or anything like that. It just works. And there's another expedient, which actually was used. My late wife had cancer, and it was used with her, and that is hyperbaric oxygen therapy. Now, so what is that? It's high oxygen, high pressure. We studied high oxygen, it builds easy water. We studied high pressure, it builds easy water. Both of those expedients taken together should build a lot of easy water. And I think that's the reason why this procedure is effective in curing cancer, or can be effective. So we're proposing a brand new paradigm. And as I said, earlier on, even the most beautiful of theories can be destroyed by one ugly fact. That might be the case, but I have a sense that there's a real possibility that this could be an important issue in reversing cancer, especially during the early stages. So, I hope to be studying it, and I hope that perhaps other people will study it as well. It's a new route to exploring the etiology of, and possibly cure of cancer.
Well, I think it's an incredibly prescient thing for many people. And so the idea that we can get more insight into how this actually works and make true progress is incredibly compelling. And I want to talk about how we might be able to help you with that shortly. But one question I did have is I've seen a lot of people talk about, oh, here's how to structure your water and, get structured water from here as a health remedy. And I'm wondering if there's any scientific any type of scientific support for this idea of like using some outside thing to structure water before we put it into our body and the increased efficacy of that, or if that's just not something that there's actually any research on.
Well, there's not much research on it. I'm skeptical when I see, I come across advertisements like the ones you're talking about. Our water contains structured water, or it's full of fourth phase water, or whatever. And there are quite a few of these companies that are now doing it. And I've not seen the research to support their claims. There may be research to support their claims. I've not seen it. And for anybody who is looking into these waters, if they're seriously interested, I would ask the company what evidence they have, and then make your judgment. Now, there are certain waters that are confirmed natural waters to have easy water. We have a test of easy water that it's a semi-quantitative test. It's not fully quantitative, but we have a spectroscopic method of testing how much easy water is contained in a sample. And I've looked at waters that have been collected by various colleagues from different springs, from different places, and some of them have as much easy water content as I've ever seen. Very strong absorption at that, and others contain almost none. So it depends on the particular stream. It depends where it comes from, and so I guess my response to your question is the commercial companies, check them out yourself, see what information you can get. And if you're satisfied, then drink it.
It sounds like drinking water anyway is a net positive, and
yes.
the claims of the enhancements are to be further investigated.
We need a lot of investigation. This is a new approach, not only to cancer, but basically to human function. And it's just at beginning stages. We now have enough evidence that we know we're onto something, but there's a whole world out there that needs to be explored, and a world that could result in a real change, a paradigm shift in health of the world.
And
I'm not sure, but I think so.
I think so too. And I think the results, the anecdotal results and even scientific results speak for themselves. And I know that, as funny as it is, I mean, it's so interesting. I've talked to so many researchers and scientists on the show, and it often seems like the most important potential breakthrough things are the hardest things to actually get the resources to continue funding. And I think you've talked to me a little bit about how that's the case with what you're working on. And so I'd love for you to just briefly share for a few minutes kind of the state of things and how people could potentially help if this deeply resonates with them and something they'd like to support.
Well, sure. I'm thrilled to do that, because we really do need support. So the usual way of getting support is to put a grant application into one of the national funding resources, like the National Institutes of Health, NIH, or National Science Foundation, NSF. I guess I give you an example of why that's almost impossible to get support for people who challenge the status quo. Suppose the whole world, everybody knows that the Earth is flat. okay, I can look out my window. I see Lake Washington. It looks flat, and I could surmise that, yeah, well, the Earth must be flat. On the other hand, suppose you, Scott, you have the idea or you think that the Earth is not flat; it might be round because you've seen evidence to point in that direction, right? You've seen satellite images, and you can see the curvature. You've seen images taken from the moon. It looks like a circle, not flat. And you've actually taken the trouble um, uh, to travel around the world. You start going west, you wind up in Tokyo, and from Tokyo you keep going west. You wind up in London, then New York, and then back home on the West Coast, which I presume is where you are. Anyway, you go around the world, and if it's flat, it's going to hard to understand how you can come back where you started. So you're scratching your head and you think, this is a really important subject. Everybody knows that the Earth is flat, but I'm thinking it's round. And you think it's important enough that you got to put in a grant application, get some money for the supplies and personnel and whatever that you're going to need to carry out your studies. And you spend a couple of months working diligently on preparing this application because you don't want to offend anybody. Because everybody thinks the Earth is flat. And you submit your grant application to one of those organizations. It's received by the gatekeeper. The gatekeeper never heard of Scott. Who's Scott? Who's this guy? And the gatekeeper doesn't know, is this a flake or is he serious about what he's doing? So being conscientious, the gatekeeper scratches his or her head and says, I better hire to review this application. I better get the world's expert in the shape of the Earth because only they have a real capacity to decide whether you're a flake or you're for real or whatever. So it goes to this expert reviewer, expert in the shape of the Earth. And of course, the expert has become the expert in the flat Earth. And you're proposing round Earth. You can imagine how this grant application is received by this flat Earth person. If you're right, he's wrong or she's wrong. We all have egos. We don't like to be wrong. And so you can imagine the reaction of this person to the round Earth idea, wanting to demonstrate fairness and objectivity, but at the same time, really wanting to assure that this does not receive any funds at all. It's almost impossible to get money for any idea that challenges the people who are reviewing your application. And that's a fundamental flaw in the setup of the granting agencies. Revolutionary proposals almost never succeed because the reviewers are in the opposite camp. They're challenging the reviewers, and so in order to get funding, it's necessary to get funding from people who who like to see science proceed, who have an instinct that everything that's in the textbook is not necessarily correct.
If someone is interested in, going on the journey with you guys and supporting you, but where are other places that they should go?
Well, the simplest way is to contact me. My email is very simple: GHP, Gerald Harvey Pollack, GHP at UW, that's my university, UW.edu. That's the best way. And I try to respond to every email. Sometimes it's really difficult. But I would be delighted, happy, thrilled to talk to somebody who would like to discuss the possibility of helping out in this direction. I would thank you for even attempting to explore further. We need
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we'll make sure to make that available and easy for people. And I just want to say thank you so much for all that you do, for all of the hard work, research, the passion that you put into this. It's incredibly evident. And I do believe it is a service to the world.
Thank you so much, Scott. I really appreciate it. Okay, and thank you all for listening. I appreciate that as well.
Awesome.
Okay,
We'll see everybody on the next show.